By the faith of man, I know my price.
I'm so bored. Shakespeare sucks. When is this going to be over?
Shh. It just started. It'll be a couple of hours.
Why does it take so long? They do those TED Talks in like 18 minutes.
Try to appreciate the language.
I can't. It's all Greek to me.
That's actually a line from Shakespeare.
Well, Shakespeare sucks. It's not relatable.
What does that even mean?
It has nothing to do with me. I've had Midsummer Night's Dreams, but they were nothing like this.
This is Othello.
Whatever, like I know somebody named Brendan Othello.
Shh. So the play has to relate to you.
Yeah, like yesterday there was something wrong with my phone, so I went to the phone place, and they told me there'd be a 30-minute wait. Does that kind of thing ever happen in Shakespeare? Somebody has a 30-minute wait at the phone store?
Not as such.
They should talk to the people who write these Shakespeares about that.
The people who write these Shakespeares?
Yeah. Isn't there like a writing staff or something?
William Shakespeare wrote all these plays.
Shakespeare's a dude? I thought Shakespeare was more of a thing, like opera. There's no Tony opera, is there?
Shh.
They should announce that at the beginning. They should say, this is a play by Shakespeare the Dude. It's about a woman who's training to run her first 5K, and she had a 30-minute wait at the phone store yesterday, and she's still getting over the death of her cat.
That is totally the plot of Measure for Measure.
For real?
No, not at all.
See, Shakespeare sucks. Anyway, now I'm going to listen to a show about minority casting, the truth in memoirs, about the value of seeing photos of death, and about the scourge of relatability. And now he prefers the Herman's Hermits version of Henry VIII, Colin McEnroe.
Shh.
There's something weird about the fact that the Othello is being played in the background there. All right, so that will come. The conversation about that will come towards the end of today's show. Today's show is the Scramble. We have a very exciting Scramble. There's not a weak moment to be found anywhere in today's Scramble, so you have to pay rapt attention, and you have to be ready to move like a gazelle from topic to topic at a moment's notice. So let me just tell you what's coming up a little bit later. We'll be talking to Caitlin Doty. She is a mortician in Los Angeles. She's actually been on our show multiple times before. In fact, as has one of our other guests. But anyway, she's got a piece in Salon about sort of the actual value of looking at photographs of dead bodies in places like Gaza or the crash of the Malaysian airliner. That far from being an invasion of privacy, it can be, anyway, a very enlightening experience and a way of kind of connecting ourselves to death in a way which we, as 21st century schizoid people, prefer, for the most part, not to be. And then towards the end of the show, Rebecca Mead will be joining us. She's a staff writer for The New Yorker, and she recently wrote about the scourge of relatability. This is all in response to perhaps an ill-considered tweet by public radio legend Ira Glass, who was watching King Lear and decided that Shakespeare sucks because it's not relatable. Those were his words, not mine. All right, so that is to come. Joining us right now, we're very excited. She is making, I think, by my count, her third appearance on our airwaves. Melanie Kintaya. She is a writer, actor, humorist, and the author of Actor, Writer, Whatever, Essays on My Rise to the Top of the Bottom of the Entertainment Industry. And Melanie Kintaya, I think the last time you were going to be on here, it was another Scramble, but something really important happened. I'm not even sure what it is. I think it may have had something to do with Woody Allen or something. And
yes, it was the Woody Allen story broke, as well as Philip Seymour Hoffman passed over the weekend. Oh,
man. So there was suddenly we had to sort of throw out our playbook and talk about other things. So it's great to get you back here so you have a little bit more control over the subject matter, and you have some really interesting topics. So I guess we're going to talk initially about a panel that you were on, the Minority Independent Producers Summit at HBO, talking about the current state of inclusiveness in the media, and specifically kind of keyed to a study out of UCLA, which basically said that that far from being a risk that networks or other programmers have to take, that inclusiveness actually brings more eyeballs to the programming. Inclusiveness and racial diversity actually allows you to sell more stuffed crust pizzas or whatever it is that you're trying to sell with your advertising rather than less. And so that I think, as you put it, some of these networks are basically leaving money on the table by being unable to bring themselves to do this. So I hope I haven't preempted everything you were about to say, but I'll let you pick up the conversational baton.
Right, right. So what happened is that the Ralph Bunche Center out of UCLA did this study. And it was a very comprehensive study. They basically watched everything that was on TV and film for the year. And they made some comparisons between the population of the United States and what we're seeing on television. It turns out, minorities or people that self-identify as non-white on the census, we're about 36.3% of the population, yet our numbers on film and television is less than 5%. However, not to bog everyone down with a bunch of numbers, we just wind up television shows featuring 41 to 50% of non-white characters get the highest household ratings on television. And so there's this huge disconnect, and the myth of it not being profitable, as you said, or a big, huge risk is just completely thrown out the window. It's actually more profitable. And I think another reason why this is it's not just the inclusiveness, and it's not just, I see someone like me on television, and therefore I'm going to watch because I would like to see a reflection of myself. I think it just winds up feeling more authentic. And then a lot of shows with all-white characters might feel dated, perhaps, is one theory I personally have.
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly people's lives are more likely to be populated with a more diverse spectrum of people. So if you're watching television and it doesn't correspond to that, you may feel odd about it. And of course, one of the problems for some shows, the problem is the show is literally dated. So I've been watching Masters of Sex, which is about the early stirrings of Masters and Johnson and their sexual research. And, you know, I mean, they have introduced an African-American character, but because of the era that it's set in, which is, sort of late 50s, early 60s, I mean, it's difficult for them to introduce black characters in roles other than as the help. I mean, it's hard for them to have a doctor or a university president who's African American. But what you're saying anyway is that the argument in the past. I mean, is it the paradigm shift here, if there is one, is that in the past people sort of said, do this because it's the right thing to do, and then your audiences will catch up with you. And this study kind of says, oh, no, your audiences are already way down the road. You just need to catch up now.
Right, right. I mean, I think there was an interesting story on NPR this morning about Africa and the lack of investment in Africa. And I think a lot of our own prejudices come into play where what we've thought about Africa is, let's give her money and Live Aid and all these different things, where we're not looking at it as the next China, which it is, investment-wise. And I think the same thing has happened in the entertainment industry is people believe that you won't watch a protagonist that is of color, and shows like Scandal and Will Smith and, different people are breaking that altogether. Even the CSIs, I mean, I don't watch those shows, but the CSIs and the procedural dramas that are sort of stylized and everybody's beautiful, those shows even have more diverse casts, and people are watching them, and they make more money. And so I'm hoping for a catch up, but my concern here, especially as a person that's an actor of color, is that I don't want this to be misread by the powers that be or the studio heads to think that continuing to cast us in stereotypical roles will make you money. Because I think it's very refreshing to see yourself when you are a person of color in the way that you actually are in life, whether it be a mother or this or that. I think Harold and Kumar, those movies are fantastic because it really breaks the stereotypes of what people consider an Asian American to be, but South Asian American to be. But if you are from New Jersey or have spent time there and young people in New Jersey, they're very typical of their ambitions to go to White Castle. So I was trying to bring that all together.
It's really the first time anyone has held up the Harold and Kumar movies as an exemplar of anything. But
I think that actually has done more for South Asian Americans and is more kind of typical of my generation's experience than something like Mississippi Masala, which was the old Mira Nair. movie or one of these, East meets West comedy ensues kind of things, because that's over with. We're assimilated. We're part of America. Again, we're 36.3% of the population, and a lot of these tensions that they're using as sort of a dramatic device they're just not there anymore, and it's starting to almost feel like hackneyed storytelling.
Yeah, and you do sort of wonder how this conversation and the cultural products that this conversation is about will look 50 years from now. I recently saw, and it kind of touches upon two topics that we're doing today. It touches upon our third topic today. I saw in New York this play Red Velvet, which had come over from England. It's about Ira Aldridge, who was really the first black actor in the 1830s to introduce not only American but European audiences to the idea that there could be a black actor in classical theater. And it takes place as he's doing Othello at Covent Garden for the first time ever. And people are going nuts in a very unpleasant way because they really feel as though they and this is actually true in the play, they can't relate to a black Othello, even though he's Othello. And so you're watching this and thinking, this is insane. I mean, people are on the verge of rioting because there's a black Othello on stage, a black man playing Othello instead of Edmund Kean in whiteface. And I sort of wonder if 50 years from now, the conversation we're having right now is going to strike people as pretty bizarre. Really? They worried about that? There was a problem about that? I mean, all these thresholds that we cross, once we cross them, you look back at them and they seem kind of ridiculous.
Well, I hope that's the case. I hope it's not 50 years from now. I hope 5 years from now it'll make a difference. And I think children's television is starting to make inroads. There's a show called Doc McStuffins. And it's a little girl, and she's a doctor to her stuffed animals that come to life when the grown-ups are away. And it's very pro-social. It's very sweet. And it's just a wonderful show. And I see my daughter, who is African-American, and her peers, who are mostly not, or some are and some aren't, they all embrace this little girl until, they're too old for it, and they move on to the next thing. And I think it just goes to show that, like, children are embracing protagonists of color, and it's getting out there. And, it's very important that we start with the children's television as far as, advancing the cause. And I think, too, for people that are in areas where they are in a community that is homogenous, where it is, you are in a white community, it is nice that people would see something besides what's on, the 6 o'clock news, as far as crime and this and that. And, 60% of my friends, my peer group, are people of color, and nobody's committing crimes. And so just to start to change, open up people's perceptions of what the quote-unquote other is, I think it would be monumentally helpful.
All right, that's a good place to end with that topic. What we do here on the Scramble is the first guest of the day. The super guest leaps from topic to topic. So your second topic that you want to talk about is sort of the question of storytelling and accuracy. I mean, memoir-type storytelling and accuracy. You've done it in your first book. You're addressing it in your next book. And so the question is, and this spills across all kinds of different writers and all kinds of different essentially non-fictional storytelling, how truthful, how accurate, how persnickety do you have to be? And so where are you alighting on this in this meadow of questions?
Well, I've come up with a formula, I think. And I think if your main goal is to delight and entertain, to make someone laugh, I think you have a little bit more leeway than if you're trying to make some sort of societal statement. And in my own book, and I think you should be honest, though. I think you should say, this is truthy or truth-ish. You don't want to deceive anyone. The purpose is not to deceive, it's to entertain. And so what made me start to think about this was, start to work on my second book. And I usually write a disclaimer, and I try to make it entertaining and to let people know this is more about, think about an old guy at the end of the bar just telling you a tale. Hopefully you won't care which parts are true and which parts aren't. And the reason I feel like humor gets a pass is, first of all, there's some devices that you need in humor. One is exaggeration. So you can't take that away from them. You can't take that away from David Sedaris. And another one is the triple. The funny thing you need to do the setup, and then the funny. And if that rhythm is taken away from you because you need to be honest, because, funny things don't necessarily happen on the third time around, that's going to castrate, I think, a lot of writers.
So, but it's a struggle, right? It's a struggle for all of us to kind of sort out our feelings about it, and it comes up in all kinds of different places. Obviously, with James Fry, I mean, this whole idea of just stories being made up out of whole cloth, most of us have a real problem with that if it's presented to us as nonfiction. But then there are these enormous gray areas, and so you had maybe a not so gray case of Mike Daisey and some of his monologues, or his big monologue on This American Life, turning out really, not to contain the truth, containing really highly fictionalized and fabricated storylines, and which led to Ira Glass, who apparently was one of the other through lines on our show today, saying, wow, maybe we should fact check David Sedaris too, because David Sedaris tells all these highly personal stories. Maybe we need to know that those are right. If we need to know that Mike Daisey isn't pulling the wool over our eyes, maybe we need to know that about David Sedaris. Or is there a difference between those two kinds of stories? I'm guessing you say, yes, there is a difference between those two kinds of stories.
Monstrous difference, yeah. I do. I think Mike Daisey was distasteful because, first of all, this is a big issue in China. There's a whole lot of awful going on in these factories anyway, and a good reporter could have got to the bottom of it anyway, and many have. But he's exploiting it for personal gain, and it's also sort of this sort of exoticizing of, again, the other or another group of people in a foreign land. It's the exoticizing of their struggle for dramatic means. Whereas someone like Mike Birbiglia, who is now, on This American Life, probably getting fact-checked. And, I don't care if he sleptwalked and really jumped out of a window on the, second floor, if it was the first floor, if it was a screen door, I don't care. Because it was funny. I was entertained. And I think it was almost like the novelization of his experience for my entertainment. He was the target. It's his life. It's his personal life. Unlike James Fry, who is not a comedian, James Fry, I guess he said something like he didn't take any anesthetic or any drugs to have a root canal. And, someone else with addiction problems might not have been as strong or this or that. It's kind of trivializing people that really do have these experiences and exoticizing those experiences for your personal gain, as opposed to making fun of yourselves and making yourself the target of the joke, or creating sort of an absurd situation somewhat based on truth to make people laugh, which is what comedians have been doing forever. I don't think, my wife is so fat. Are they really that fat?
Well, although I do feel as though this is a butterfly that never really quite comes to rest. I mean, formula notwithstanding, I feel that there are always going to be some people who feel like, well, first of all, putting a disclaimer somewhere, it's a little bit like a pharmaceutical warning. You hope you see it, but maybe you don't. And that, people tend to kind of defend stuff that they like.
Right.
And so,
agreed.
You brought up in pre-broadcast conversations Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, which most people now suspect are, not very accurate representations of his travel. They don't square up very well with his own diaries about the same amount of travel. But then, you've got somebody like Jay Parini, who's a great writer, but also an archiver and kind of curator of Steinbeck. And he says, well, it would be a mistake to take it literally. He's a novelist. Of course, everybody gets that. Everybody understands that this isn't sort of a word-for-word transcription of his trip. Whereas you might say, well, no, everybody doesn't understand that.
Right. No, I don't think so. And I think he did pass it off as if it's still in the memoir section at Barnes & Noble. So I don't think that's quite understood, but I don't think it diminishes the work. Mm-hmm. I don't think a disclaimer would have hurt him because all of his observations are still very, very apt. His observations on the homogenization of America and how America was changing, and the sort of look to the future of what we have is strip mall America, and everything's sort of the same, and you go to McDonald's in one place and it's the same as the other, and the end of these roadside cafes. All of those things actually did come to pass, and so it would not have been. I don't think it would have diminished the work. I mean, Animal Farm is still Animal Farm and a great piece of work. And I know that animals don't really talk. And I don't think it would have hurt Travels with Charlie for that reason, that he is such a wonderful writer.
I'm going to let, on this topic, Mike Daisy, of all people, have the last word. When Ira Glass was talking about maybe fact-checking David Sedaris as a result of Mike Daisy's transgressions, Mike Daisy wrote, "First, no one is upset with Mr. Sedaris' work. No one. No one is listening to Santaland Diaries and then saying to themselves, I am now informed about the true nature of Macy's elf policies from the early 90s, which is good because I am writing a PhD thesis on that subject." So anyway, we've got one transgressor sticking up for another writer, and maybe that sort of gets to the whole question of, or the whole reality that, people kind of wind up making their own decisions. Maybe each one of us as consumers has our own recipe or formula for trying to figure out how we feel about all these really complicated issues of truth and creativity. So the third of your topics, Melanie Kandaya, is you want to offer people some help, people who have already made their way through Mad Men and Orange is the New Black and House of Cards, and it's summertime, and they know that it's dangerous to go outside in the sun. They still want to watch lots of television, or at least some, and they've run out of things, or they think they've run out of things, but you don't think they've run out of things. You want to mention a few of your recommendations?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, if you haven't seen The Wire, just forget everything I'm about to say and go and watch The Wire. Just do that with the rest of your summer.
Right, and that will touch back to our original topic, because then you'll say, well, why doesn't Idris Elba just star in everything? Because he's more interesting to watch than anybody else. And that sort of solves the...
Don't worry.
Yeah, okay.
He'll be on the list.
I know he's in here. He's also in there somewhere else. I see him there on the list. Go ahead.
Yes, but, Idris Elba can read the telephone book, and I think the audience would be quite pleased. Anyhow, moving on. House of Cards. So you're done with House of Cards. May I suggest the BBC's State of Play? And please do not confuse this with a film adaptation with Russell Crowe and Ben Affleck. Go for the 2003 BBC miniseries, and you can get that on Netflix. It is phenomenal. And there's a Scottish actress, Kelly MacDonald, and she is fantastic. It's got politics, intrigue, a lot of the same themes, a lot the same tone without the addressing the camera monologue, and it's absolutely fabulous.
Kelly MacDonald's great too. She's also in Boardwalk Empire, another thing you can binge on if you haven't seen. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, and if you're sick of the cynical view of Washington and would like a laugh, full disclosure, I am in one of the episodes of this show, but I basically called my manager and begged her to get me an audition for any role, no matter how big or small, on the show. And it is called Alpha House. It is a comedy in the vein of Veep, but it really does go into the inner workings of Washington and the deal makings and all of that. And it stars John Goodman and Clark Johnson, who was on The Wire, and it is hysterical. It is very funny, and it is written by Gary Trudeau of Doonesbury fame.
All right, so give us a few more. We're going to run out of time. We can't get through all your recommendations, so you may want to hit your highlights.
Okay, Mad Men. So I would recommend BBC's The Hour. It is a show about starting around the same era, 1956. 60 Minutes news type program. It is fantastic.
Also has Dominic West also from... Yes. So you have to see The Wire first so you'll understand who all these actors are, no matter what you do. And also, if you feel like you would miss the smoking that's on Mad Men, watch The Hour. I think they actually smoke more on The Hour.
Yes, they do. Unfortunately, the show was canceled before they got a third season and kind of leaves the second season with a cliffhanger, but you could actually go online and find out what the executive producer was planning for the ending. So it's not a total cliffhanger. And I would also recommend The Bletchley Circle, which was on PBS, which is a bunch of women that used to work as code breakers at Bletchley Park out in the countryside in England during World War II. And they were these brilliant code breakers, so bright, so talented. And after the war ends, they're forced into their traditional roles as wives and mothers and secretaries, letting sort of their talents lie fallow until they start solving crimes in London, and it is wonderful.
All right, you know what, Melanie Kentaya, I hate to say it, but I think we're going to have to take a break. I'm getting that sign from the producers. So what we'll do is we'll post some of your other recommendations, which are very similar to what my recommendations would be, except that you know about a whole bunch of things that I don't know about. But your other recommendations are a lot of them are really terrific, and you and I and my significant other are the only three people I know who care about AMC's Rubicon, which was really good, but got canceled in its prime. Too soon. Yeah. All right. So it's so great to talk to you. As usual, you've been a spellbinding super guest, and we'll have you on again very soon.
Thank you so much.
You watch too much TV. Way too much for me.
All right, we are back. This is The Scramble, and we do on The Scramble leap a little bit from topic to topic, but we do it gracefully. So as we were getting ready for The Scramble, looking at really interesting stuff that was published over the weekend, topics that have come up, I suddenly found on Salon.com an essay by an old friend of ours, Caitlin Doty. Is a mortician in Los Angeles, known for her video series, Ask a Mortician. She's the founder of the Order of the Good Death.com and the author of the forthcoming Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. So she's joining us now. And so, Caitlin Doty, what you wrote about on Salon was something that comes up in journalism a lot. And I've seen a lot of pieces and attended panel discussions and listened to interviews of journalists, photo editors and managing editors and reporters talking about the value of placing in plain view pictures of people who have died in some horrible but major news event, whether it's in war or a plane crash or something like that. I've never seen a mortician talk about it before, never read a mortician. So it really jumped out at me. And so your way of looking at this is I think, different from what we typically hear from journalists. And you start in a different place, right, which is our typical daily 21st century estrangement from death and all its particulars. So I'll let you start there, and where do you go? What's your next leap?
Sure. I think that I do start in a very different place because I'm not coming from a place of journalism. I'm coming from a place of death care, and specifically death theory and our relationship with the physical dead body. And as far as seeing images of I say corpses, which is kind of a hard word for some people, but that is the technical name for dead bodies. So we don't really see them anymore in American society. It used to be, even just 100 years ago, that not only were we seeing dead bodies all the time because people were dying all the time, but people died very, very quickly and very swiftly, usually of infectious diseases or some kind of violence. So today, people tend to die very, very slowly, medicalized over a long period of time, and they tend to die. We don't really see the dead bodies because we have this whole funeral home structure that takes them out of our view. So in a way, if you're thinking about journalism and showing the dead body, the issue isn't only should we show the dead body, but the issue is what does that mean for the broader culture and our relationship with death?
Okay, so the counter argument might be, right, but so 100 years ago, people died in their homes, people died elsewhere and were brought back to their homes and were laid out on the dining table and washed down and prepared for death. And okay, so we get that. We understand that people had a much more day-to-day relationship with death and with corpses. On the other hand, there was also 100 years ago, effectively no mass media. So the people who were going to see this, the people who were going to see a dead body in a tractor accident on a farm, or or even something that might take place in an American city in 1914, would be a relatively select few. Not that there weren't newspapers in 1914, but still not mass media the way we have it now, and that mass media is inherently intrusive. So that yes, familiarity with dead bodies is good, but there is such a thing as privacy, and we want to respect the privacy of the family and of the dead person. And so maybe that's an argument for mass media exercising some restraint in treating these images as though they were just news.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a really, I mean, the line is so fine that you can almost not even see it, right? Mm-hmm. And in the Civil War, that's sort of when the first images were coming back of battle in some kind of media, not only battle, but the remains of the bodies on the battlefield. But that was weeks in the coming. That wasn't, I'm tweeting a picture of the Malaysian plane crash and this is your son. Mm-hmm. that I'm tweeting directly to you, and if you're searching for images, you can find them immediately before you have even heard officially whether or not he was on the plane. So that's a much finer line, and I do agree with the privacy argument for the people who are grieving, but there's also this element of what does the larger culture need to see? What does the hundreds of thousands of people who are going to be seeing these images, what can we learn from them? If they're going to be out there, what can we learn from them as not only what the corpses mean, but how did they die? What is the fact that they died in war, or the fact that they died with this terrible mechanized modern violence? What does that mean? And can we actually learn from those images as a broader culture?
So then the question, there's so many different stakeholders in a situation like this. And so then the question becomes, is it educative and helpful for people to see this even though they weren't planning on it? And I mean, one of my experiences during the time of the Boston Marathon bombings is, in the first blush, the few moments after this, as we were trying to figure out what happened, how bad was this, trying to assemble some mosaic of understanding, I was just frantically clicking around on Twitter feeds, and people were posting pictures of either dead people or graphically, horribly injured people, like a person with his leg blown off in full view. And even though I'm a journalist, I wasn't really expecting that, and I wasn't necessarily ready for it. And I worried about other people encountering that and not being ready for it. Although you could make the argument that letting people shield themselves from the violence in Gaza and its consequences isn't good for society as a whole. Maybe people should see these things whether they feel like opting into them or not. What's your take?
I do think that people should have to face them, but I also know that context is extremely important. And sort of what you're talking about, just coming up on these images without context, without the full story yet, and it's a kind of psychological terror when you do that, right? Because it's almost like you're there and you can see it and you're in the moment. But if you have the right context, which is, yes, this is an absolutely horrible thing. It can be grotesque. It goes against our sense of self. If you go the extra steps and say, why does this make me feel this way? Why is it so horrifying? Why is it so different now, my feelings about this, than it might have been 100 years ago? And you look at the history and you look at your own relationship with death. I think ultimately that's a bigger, I don't want to say win, but it's a bigger benefit for you specifically and for society as a whole.
I mean, in some ways, the problem that we're addressing is also the thing that makes it more assaultive. The fact that we don't see death very much. I don't
100%. Yeah,
I don't work on a farm. I don't see people die from a thresher. I'm less likely than a person in 1888 to see somebody die in a horrible railroad accident, something like that. We don't see it, but that makes us so much more vulnerable when we do see it. A person who saw those images, who was a little bit more accustomed to them, probably wouldn't have the same level of revulsion and disquiet.
Absolutely, and that's what I say in the article is that I've seen a lot of dead human bodies in my career, and when I see these violent pictures, they disturb me on the level of how the people died, because obviously it's war, it's terrorism, it disturbs me, but the actual corpses, the dead bodies themselves, don't disturb me in that visceral way, because it looks like a dead body that has died in a violent way, similar to a violent car accident or a shooting that I do see in my day-to-day work. So I don't see the corpse itself as a threat. I see how they died as a threat, but I don't see the dead body itself as a threat, which is a real kind of comfort to me that I know a lot of other people don't have, because they don't see it and they're hidden from it and they're not exposed in their day-to-day life to the fact that people die and this is what dead bodies look like.
Let's grab a call from John in Kensington. Hi, John.
Hi, I'm also a funeral director, and I will tell you that I went to a realtor's dinner, and the after-dinner speaker was Dr. Lee, who had a slideshow that I was so appalled by. It was so disrespectful, and as an embalmer to be appalled, it's got to go somewhere.
We should say this is Dr. Henry Lee, the former head of the Connecticut State Crime Lab.
I thought it was funny. He was giggling and joking about these, and he was showing slides of dead bodies, and I thought, Mother of Moses, are we so desensitized that this has become funny? It was awful.
So, Caitlin Doty, last word on this. Obviously, one of the things that's clear in your article is that this whole inquisition into death has to be done with a certain amount of respect and gravity.
Absolutely. And in the way that we become desensitized, it's not because we see so many real dead bodies. It's because we see only fake dead bodies. We see crime show dead bodies, and we see zombie dead bodies. And we don't really have the gravitas and connection to the actual family and the death and the grief, because that's not what we see. The real death is not what we see. The fake, gory, televised crime show death is what we see. And so mass media has kind of led us to be desensitized in a different way, not an entirely healthy way, would be my argument.
All right, Caitlin Doty, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to grab a break here. We're going to move on. Rebecca Mead from The New Yorker will be joining us for our third topic of the day right after this.
Cause I can't look away like the rest, shaking my head, cause we ain't past this yet. Let's start again. Look away, no I can't look away, no I can't look away, no I can't look away. Let us splash in the headlines, praised or demonized. It's up to us, we will be the ones who will decide. Look away.
Today's show was produced by Betsy Kaplan and me. Our interns are Lily Tyson and Allison Ehrenreich. Greg Hill appeared in the intro and tweets for us at WNPR Colin. The part of Bill Curry was played by Peter Ustinov. For show pages, articles, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff performing The Taming of the Stew and Much Ado About Stuffing, visit our website, WNPR.org. On tomorrow's show, is the internet dampening our imaginations? And now, back to Colin.
All right, so our final topic here on the Scramble today, I'm so excited about this guest, as I am about all of our guests, but maybe especially so because I've enjoyed her writing so much over the years. But let me set the stage a little bit, as it were, by saying, Shakespeare was having kind of a rough summer. More Americans probably know The Fault in Our Stars than know that the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. And now comes a tweet from Ira Glass. I'm a little bit late to this party, but it actually happened a few days ago. But his first tweet upon seeing King Lear, starring John Lithgow, said that John Lithgow as Lear tonight, amazing. Shakespeare, not good. No stakes, not relatable. I think I'm realizing Shakespeare sucks. That's Ira Glass speaking, not me. I want to emphasize this. So the good news for Shakespeare is that it turns out like a lot of people really like him and want to protect him against things like that. The New Yorker's Rebecca Mead was less interested maybe in the transgressions of Ira Glass than in the criterion that he was applying, the criterion of relatability. Relatable, it's a very strange word. It doesn't even really look quite right on the page when you see it. Her own word processing program doesn't recognize it and underlines it as something that's probably wrong. But Rebecca Mead, first of all, I do want to say how much I've enjoyed your writing in the past, how excited I am to have you here with us today. One of the first things you did as this word kind of clanged against your ears and eyeballs was to investigate how pervasive it's become in at least written language and searchable language. What did you find out?
Oh, well, let me just say thanks, Colin. I'm so excited to be on, so thank you for having me. I sort of looked around to look into the rise of relatable. This is a word that didn't even exist in the meaning that we currently ascribe to it, which is to say it's something that I get because it's about somebody who's like me or I can understand their position or their life. It didn't have that meaning. I mean, relatable used to mean something that was tellable to another person. I could relate it to you. Or it could mean, something that was related to another thing. But this rise in the prevalence of it seems to have come about through, it's kind of started with the television industry by the looks of things. And so TV executives talk about, is a character relatable, is a storyline relatable? And it's spread from television to more critical discourse and more common discourse in only about the last 5 years. I looked in the New York Times, which has a wonderful tool for searching how often a word appears in the New York Times. And I think 5 years ago it appeared 16 times, the word relatable. And then last year it was 116 in 116 different articles. So that's quite a leap.
So as we think about this, as we begin to tease this apart, there's all kinds of issues that pop up. And I think the first one is some kind of implied balance of power between the teller of the story and the absorber, the consumer of the story. And if relatable is going to be elevated as a virtue almost above all others, what you're really saying is that it's all, the responsibility is squarely on the shoulders of the teller of the story to tell a story that is digestible in a very familiar way, and none of the responsibility is on the listener or the absorber of the story to try to understand something that's not immediately familiar. I want you to react to that.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I mean, I think of it as relatability means that we are expecting the work to come to us in a way, and that I'm just sitting there as if I was sitting watching my TV, passively absorbing whatever this work of art, if it's a movie, if it's a book, whatever it is, and I'm expecting it to meet me where I am, rather than for me to have to make some kind of emotional effort of empathy, effort of imagination to think myself into a different kind of a character from myself, or even to appreciate a work not because of character, but because of form or structure or language or any of those things. I mean, how Ira Glass feels about Shakespeare, we can all have, different opinions about different works, and we can think, we can like them or not. But, and how he feels about Shakespeare is kind of between him and his conscience. But, I think to dismiss a work or an author as not relatable is to say they're not working hard enough to approach me, instead of thinking, what can I do in my own self to bring myself up to the level where I could appreciate this work? Because I think, most of us, generally speaking, Shakespeare's agreed to be great. So why, what does one have to do in order to be able to appreciate a greater or a lesser work?
Yeah, I found myself thinking that the Ira Glass, whom I know, not personally, but and love his work, I wanted that Ira Glass to go, wow, I didn't really get that exactly. Maybe we should do a whole show about King Lear and just explore it and explore what's in it and why it is great and why it's constantly done and why every great actor ends his career doing King Lear. And
that's a great idea for a show. I hope he's listening, and I hope he does it. I would love to listen to that show. No, I mean a more humble way of saying it. Either in the case of Ira Glass or anybody might be just, instead of saying, I don't relate to it, it sucks, would be to say, well, I don't like it, or even better, I don't understand it. I mean, that's what we're really saying when we're saying I don't find something relatable, or at least a large percentage of what we're saying, I believe, is to say I don't get it, I don't like it, I don't understand it, and I don't want to do the work that's required to approach it.
Just for the record, we've done an entire 1-hour show about Macbeth here, and it was really interesting. And it immediately snaked out into all kinds of very relatable discourse, including, with Macbeth, you're very close to the question of how a person who was a community organizer and a constitutional law scholar could suddenly find himself sitting on top of a government that engages in extrajudicial executions and can't close Guantanamo and occasionally kills children with drone strikes and is now going to probably send a lot of kids back to a very dangerous situation in Guatemala and other Northern Triangle countries. Well, Macbeth kind of asked that question: was there somebody inside you who was going to do this all along, or are you shaped by circumstances beyond your control? So, it's as a play goes, it's a great way for asking all kinds of contemporary and relatable questions.
Well, of course, and, pretty much all of Shakespeare is too. So, Ira Glass may have been trolling slightly, or he may just, we all say stupid things on Twitter, and, and then people tell us that we were stupid, and sometimes we admit it. But I think, I think that identification with character when reading a work, a novel, seeing a play, any of those things, isn't a bad place to start at all. I'm not suggesting that one doesn't identify with one's favorite characters in literature. I just wrote a book about the great novel Middlemarch by George Eliot, and I've certainly identified with different characters in that book throughout my life. But I think that, if identification is where your criticism of a work ends, then you haven't gone very far. And the problem with the suggestion of relatability and the kind of popularity of relatability as a concept is that we don't think we have to. It suggests we don't have to go any further than that first step. And if we don't find something relatable, we're off the hook because it hasn't done the work that it was required of it.
You know, I also wonder whether relatable is kind of a code word for, at least in this context, for a group of other concerns. In other words, relatable about Shakespeare, I wonder if it has to do with the language, with the period quality of it. I keep thinking of House of Cards, which I was able to do a little bit of research and notice that Ira Glass had some basically a flattering comparison he wanted to make to House of Cards. Well, House of Cards is basically Richard III, you know, except that Bosworth Field never seems to come, but it's Richard III otherwise, up to and including the fact that the protagonist, who is deeply, deeply evil and morally misshapen, talks to the audience periodically, just as Richard does. So what's relatable about House of Cards that is not relatable about a history play like Richard III? And I have to assume that relatable is kind of a code word, either for historical period or for language or effort of concentration.
I think that's probably right. I mean, we're saying it's difficult, it's hard, it's inaccessible to us is what we're saying. And the idea that, you know, we want something to be easily accessible, you know, it's connected to all kinds of things, isn't it? I mean, you know, my kid's in third grade at school, and a lot of the work that is done in elementary school is kids being and beyond is, you know, kids being asked to read a text and then and write about how they feel about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it shouldn't be all that one's doing, you know, and it shouldn't be all that kids are doing, and it shouldn't be all that anybody's learning to do. But we, you know, tend to encourage this way of understanding everything through our own. You know, our own experience and our own feelings, and our feelings as opposed to our intellectual analysis or anything that might take a little bit more work. Yeah, we're all prey to this. I mean, in my piece, I wrote about Richard Linklater's movie Boyhood, which I called the apotheosis of relatability, because it is a kind of you know, how can one not feel with that boy as he grows from 6 years old to 18 years old? How can one not become involved in that drama of getting older? It's something that we all experience, and you know, the movie had me, you know, I found it completely harrowing. I mean, it affected me very, very deeply, but it also felt to me completely empty as you know, in so many ways in terms of characterization and plot and story, and everything that I got out of it, I felt that I had put into it. You know, it was all relatability and nothing else. And you know, in some ways that's very, very powerful. But it's also there's also something limited about that too.
Oh, we're talking to Rebecca Mead. She's a staff writer for The New Yorker. You really want to read this piece, The Scourge of Relatability, and then you want to read My Life in Middlemarch, her book. We only have about 60 seconds left. I don't know if I dare ask you this question, but I'll do it anyway, which is that you then sort of wonder, is this always not a good excuse? And the example that I stumble upon in my mind is, I know people who will have nothing to do with anything Tolkien or Tolkienish, and they basically use the same argument, right? I don't know any elves, I don't know any dwarves, I don't know any hobbits, I don't know anybody with a ring that has to be destroyed. This just isn't real. There aren't any dragons. Leave me out of this. I want no part of it. And it's hard to make the counter argument as forcefully as one might about Julius Caesar or Hamlet.
Right. I mean, I think that's right. But I think that, you know, don't criticize a work for not meeting your expectations. And you're allowed to have taste. You know, you're allowed to have a different taste from that of other people, and you're allowed even not to like Shakespeare. But I don't think you're allowed to say that Shakespeare sucks because he's not relatable. You have to work a little bit harder than that.
I think we know one person who will never say that again. He's had a very rough week, and probably a worse week than he did deserve. We are so excited to have you on, Rebecca Mead. I should say that later this week I'll be seeing Boyhood, and we will be talking about it on Friday's show. Four of us will be having an extended conversation about Boyhood. So,
wonderful. Well, I will listen in with great interest and pleasure.
I would be so honored to think that you were. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's Rebecca Mead from The New Yorker. Thanks very much to Betsy Kaplan and Kyone Wolf for pulling this show together. We do it very fast on Mondays because we like it to be exciting, because we're adrenaline junkies, even though we work in public radio.
High time lie low, wherefore art thou Romeo, the nation's favorite bard Shakespeare. doopy doopy, to be or not to be. Shooby doopy doopy Shakespeare.
Well, show's over, and I thought I couldn't get through it. All's well that ends well, right?
Yes, what a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how she eats all my popcorn.
The lady doth protest too much,
That's not quite how that's used.